world.
A very good morning and welcome to the TooFatLardies Oddcast, a very special Antwerp and Crisis edition, and I'm here with the Starsky and Hutch of Wargaming. We've got Nick Skinner and Richard Clark. Yeah. Guys, here we are in Zebra 3. How are you both doing?
I feel more like Bob Hopkins on the move, actually.
Have you got a big Starsky cardigan? I bet you
am actually wearing a cardigan.
You be Starsky and I'll be Hutch.
Yeah.
Does that make me Huggy Bear?
That makes you Huggy Bear. You are the Huggy Bear of Wargaming, Sidney.
Well, that's the man who I take all my fashion tips from. So it's pitch dark here, and we're flying around. Is this still the M25?
It is, mate. I think this is the second time round it. We missed the junction the first time, and Sid said, just keep going.
It's a big circle. And we're on the road.
It's the circle of life.
And we're on the road to Antwerp.
We are. Well, not yet.
Not yet. We've got to go on the M20 first.
Yeah, we're on our road to Kent and the Tunnel sous le Manche.
And this is not our first journey to Dover and then Antwerp, is it?
No. We've done it many times. I was trying to work out the other day when we first went there. I think it was 2006. Might have been 2007.
2007 was my first. I think was in 2008 with Operation H. I think you went Operation the year before to reconnoitre it.
We reconnoitred it at speed because we forgot the fact that the clocks went forward when you go across the channel.
Yeah.
So we suddenly realised we had to do Antwerp in, was it 2 hours?
Something ridiculous.
Something absurd.
And very illegal.
And we did it.
We did it, yeah.
And we had fun yesterday on the various social media and also on WhatsApp, sharing some of the old photos from previous Antwerps. Some good memories there. Lots of beer, but some quite entertaining sort of stories coming out.
And some hair, Sid. I saw you had some hair in those photos.
Yeah. Well, it was that long ago, indeed.
I think I must have a picture in an attic because I'm just eternally youthful in all of those pictures.
I think you've always looked old, Richard, and we're now just catching up with you. I mean, that's probably what it's been.
Oh, yeah.
And what is it, apart from having hair or not having hair, that makes Antwerp so special as a show?
If you could bottle it and sell it, Sidney, you'd make a fortune. I think it's a combination of so many different factors. First of all, excuse me, credit has really got to go to the Tin Soldiers of Antwerp, and the fact that they are, really, really brilliant hosts. They couldn't make you more welcome. They couldn't be more helpful. I think it's the fact that we're going to see a whole raft of games that we just don't see on the UK show circuit. So there's always some fantastic games. People probably get a bit bored of me talking about the Dortmund Wargamers because they always produce a fabulous looking game every year. And there's some really, really different, interesting traders there. And then you combine that with the fact that Antwerp is a great city where there's so much going on, so many great bars, so many great restaurants, such a beautiful old European city made up of many numerous beautiful squares with, the cathedral and the town hall. It's just a captivating experience all round.
Nick, it is quite a different environment, isn't it? I mean, we're obviously used to going to the UK shows. We've been up and down the country, Salute, Claymore, and everywhere in between. And we know what a UK Wargames show is, and we're very familiar with that. But Antwerp is just something a little bit different, I always think, isn't it?
I think if you compare it to some of the big shows, the pace of it is much more civilised. As an experience to go to, I think as a punter, as well as an exhibitor, gamer, somebody who's running a trade stand, etc. Exhibitionist is the word I was seeking, perhaps. It's just got a more relaxed feel about it.
Yeah.
It's organised, but without being too strict in its in the way that it's done.
Yeah,
it's people find their place. If you need a spare table or if you need to lose a table, you can do that easily enough. It's access is simple. You park out the back of the building and you can load in through the door. So all those things are really important. And I think that when the show gets underway and the doors open and people come in, the people are really, really friendly. I don't know if people in Belgium have a slightly different mindset when they go to shows. They're more interested, I think, in the games rather than just the trading experience. Whereas in the UK, it's very much what am I going to go and buy? My sense is that when at Crisis, it's what am I going to go and see and who am I going to go and talk to? And I think the atmosphere in the room is really, really lovely, and it is something special for all the reasons that Richard's already said. It's nice to get to connect with people. You see people at Antwerp that you only see once a year, whereas you go to the shows in the UK, we do see a lot of the same old faces, and we do see new people. But at Antwerp, it's a really nice chance to connect with new people and meet friends of Lard.
I like the fact that we can sit and watch those French blokes drink themselves into a coma. They set their game up, open the bottles of Vino Colapso and drink until they fall over. It's absolutely brilliant.
That guy might still be there from last year.
It was really a lovely sight to see. I mean, as a lover of La Belle France, it encapsulated everything which was absolutely fantastic about that way of life. You just uncork your wine and you drink a bottle to yourself, and the game sort of carries on, and then you just fall asleep about 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of about 3,000 people. It was wonderful to see.
That's right. That puddle of insouciance.
We were oozing it. They were oozing it last year. I very much hope they'll be on the table next to us this year. We can only hope Willie has done a good job in making sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So we're not going to have, I think, our normal segments because we are going to be moving on in this Oddcast in a very special way for our journey to Crisis with a whole section of Ask Sidney.
But before that, Sid, I'm going to ask you a question myself.
Oh no.
You're from Yorkshire, and trying to get sixpence out of you is like trying to get an audience with the Pope.
It's notoriously difficult, yes.
So, have you thought that there may be anything at Crisis that might get you to get your little purse out and cross anybody's palm with your hard-earned cash?
That's a really good question.
I know.
It's such a good question. I wish you'd asked me that previously. I've got to say that one of the things I liked about the show most is the number of traders there that you just don't get in the UK, and they're selling a selection of items that often they've done 3D printing themselves, or they're sort of running a small casting business. Every year I go over, there's a part in the back of the show which deals with sort of tools. So you've got magnifying lenses, you've got very small tweezers, you've got all sorts of bits and bobs which you sort of use in sort of converting figures and converting models.
I've heard you need very small tweezers.
And a magnifying glass.
They are perfect for what I'm dealing with on a near daily basis, Nicholas. And that's one of the highlights of the show for me, is going around those and really sort of getting my fingers on those sorts of pieces of equipment. There's really nothing which excites me more than that.
What would Huggy Bear do with a magnifying glass and a pair of tweezers?
Well, who knows? Probably repair some of his clothes.
I think I'm also looking forward to seeing some good stuff out there.
So what are you going to buy? What are you going to buy?
He's avoided the question, hasn't he?
I know. He's typical bloody politician.
He's going to buy tweezers and a magnifying glass.
There's a slight confession here, because the last 2 years I've been to Antwerp. I bought some model boats, some really great 28mm small sort of cogs and caravels and boats. And they're really great, and I think we sort of had a look at them last year, and they were really fantastic. To my shame, out of the 8 that I bought over 2 years, I've only made up 1, so I'm a bit cautious about just coming back laden with stuff that just sits at the bottom of the drawer and it doesn't get used. But we'll see. I mean, maybe some things will entice me, but it's going to be quirky sort of one-off things which I haven't seen before. I certainly won't be coming back with a load of sort of plastic boxes of Perry miniatures or whatever.
Well, maybe tomorrow at the end of the show we can get you to empty your bag on the table, and we can all enjoy the delights of it.
We can all check out your goodies. What about you,
I like
Nicholas?
nothing more than emptying my sack before you.
Thank you.
So, What?
As if the innuendo wasn't strong enough.
No, exactly. I was going to say, can we write that a bit larger, please? Right, Nicholas. I'm going to ask Nicholas.
Yes.
What about you, mate?
I am looking forward to seeing with my own 2 eyes Colin Farrant's lovely new church. So Charlie Foxtrot, he's designed a new World War II. Well, I suppose it's not World War II, but it's
religious, mate.
Yes,
it's religious.
Built in the 14th century, lasting until World War II when it was destroyed.
Yeah.
He's made a very lovely church, and I think he's only shipping 2 out. I think he's only taking 2 to Antwerp. But I'm looking forward to seeing it with my own 2 eyes. Really looking forward to that. And a bit like I said, I'm looking forward to going round and just seeing what's there that catches my eye. I've got always on the lookout for scatter. Always on the lookout for good scatter, and really like to get some new fences maybe.
Well, unlike you two who've been very vague, I'm buying 3 packs of WN14, 2 packs of WN16. No, actually, I've...
we're going over the Dartford Bridge, ladies and gentlemen. You can see the lights of the City of London twinkling.
You can, in the distance. I'm not going with anything specific in mind, but what I would like to buy is some terrain for the club. So I'm maybe looking at buying some trees.
We should look at road, actually.
I want to look at some roads. I'm also looking for maybe some Roman buildings in MDF. I'm really looking for a Roman farm for hairy barbarians to raid. But I don't know that I really want it to be a full-on villa. I think it would be kind of like a proto-villa that a Roman settler has built across the Rhine. And so maybe, barns and stuff like that. I'm just generally open-minded, and I'm looking to pick up a dice tower because Warbases has made me a prototype TooFatLardies dice tower.
Super.
Which we're going to be able to use on our videos. So that we always roll the dice in the right place so we can see what the dice results are.
What about the ones that get thrown across the room? What do we do with those?
I'm actually buying a huge net to catch them. But no, we won't mention them. So a few things on my vague shopping list, but really it's see if there's any ancient figures that catch my eye.
I can see that
more terrain than figures is what I'm really looking for.
I do have some other things on my shopping list, though.
Oh, right.
Here we go now.
Now the truth can be told.
I think chips and mayonnaise would be on my list. Maybe some waffles.
Beers on my list.
A few glasses of De Koenig or something similar. And some lovely chocolates to take back to my nearest and dearest. They will be on the top of the bag when I come home, and then underneath will be all the exciting lead stuff.
Very clever. The basic principles of smuggling. You've really got it, haven't you, really? Yeah, good. Okay, well, that's enough of that. Frankly, I was a little bit disappointed with that segment. I thought the two of you could have been more forthcoming. But anyway, let's write it off as a waste of time. On to the next bit, Sidney.
I like to see what tickles my fancy in the moment.
Right. I think that's it. When you're walking through, there will be things that we'll be bringing back, I'm sure, Richard. So we can check in at
blah. Get
the
on
end
with
of the week. Very good. Well, that brings us on to our next segment.
Oh!
Thank you very much. And that is a very large selection of Ask Sidney questions.
Ask Sidney.
Ask Sidney, indeed.
Hashtag Ask Sidney, in fact.
Which we like to receive the questions, and we always like them under the hashtag Ask Sidney. We put out the call for questions, was it on Tuesday or Wednesday this week, and we were inundated.
Inundated, mate. Do you know what? So often you see on these things, send us your question, nobody bothers, but my God, if it had been physical mail coming through my letterbox, I don't think I'd have been able to leave the house.
Yeah. We were not only were we inundated, we were also buried.
We were buried. That's right. We were.
And in the way of all of these hashtag Ask Sidney question sessions, we have collected all the questions that we received.
I threw some away because they were crap, if I'm honest.
We've collected almost all of the questions we received into a bumper edition, which hopefully will mean that by the end of it we have our pulse on the heartbeat of the hobby. and we can make sure...
Is that a medical term?
And we can make sure that we've really got into the nooks and crannies of each one of those questions. So,
Ooh.
our first question...
With your magnifying glass and tweezers.
With my magnifying glass and tweezers... Well, I don't have them yet.
Is that the first question?
But if I had my soon-to-be-purchased magnifying glass and tweezers, I would see that Mr. Adrian Mist in Kent...
we must be right outside his house.
We should go and knock on his door.
We should knock on his door, yeah.
Hello.
What's for breakfast, Adrian?
We could do with some bacon. Adrian asks...
Bacon.
The excellent question. How will infamy differ from Dux Britanniarum?
This is a really important question, and it's when Richard said, first of all, that he wanted to work on an ancient set. The very first thing I said to him was, that's a really great idea, but it's got to be different to Dux Britanniarum, because otherwise on the tabletop it's going to look very similar, and people will say to you, tell me, Richard, how is this different to Dux Britanniarum? So it is a question that's been posed, and I'm sure it's one that the man himself can answer. Richard, tell us, how is infamy going to be different to Dux Britanniarum?
It's almost identical. No, I'm not lying. It's a totally different game. What can I say? I intentionally didn't get my copy of Dux out when I was going through the initial design phase of Infamy. I know I've mentioned before, probably ad nauseum, the fact that I had all these ideas churning away, and when I actually came to put pen to paper, they literally spewed out in a sort of projectile vomit of rules ideas that literally went on and on and on for a couple of days as I was frantically trying to write everything down. Some of it was coming so quickly, I was having to use my own sort of shoddy version of shorthand just to try and get all the ideas down. Anyway, having done all that and then tidied it up a bit, I thought, well, I'm going to go and have a look at Dux and see what my subconscious has recycled, and actually pretty much nothing. Dux Britanniarum was the first rule set where we had a force morale system, but the implications of that were totally different to the force morale system that we get in Chain of Command, whereby you start, once you get to 4, you start, or 5, or whatever the number is depending on your troop type, you start losing command dice and so on and so forth. In Dux it simply gave you a mechanism for that's the end of the battle. When it got down to 0, and when it got to 2, you really wanted to sort of pull off the table. So there is a force morale in there. I mean, we still use items like shock, mechanisms like shock, but really it's a totally different game. Dux Britanniarum really designed for very small raiding forces, whereas Infamy is more traditional large skirmish in the sharp practice genre, so it has a feel more of a small battle rather than a punch-up. Whereas I very intentionally, I wanted with Dux Britanniarum to give a feeling of a depopulated, almost post-apocalypse land in which these small fiefdoms and kingdoms were being carved out once the Romans had left, and these bands of characters, almost in a sort of Mad Max type fashion, raiding and trying to steal things, and then building up enough kudos to try and carve out their own kingdoms. It really has a post-apocalypse feel to it. Whereas in Infamy, I really wanted to capture the feel of the might of the Empire being threatened by the barbarians in the first look. As we go forward and we cover things like the Punic Wars and Greeks, we're going to be looking for a slightly different feel. And the asymmetrical nature of the great civilization bumping into the great unwashed, really. But the mechanisms are totally different. The game size is significantly different, and the feel of the game is very different. I really wouldn't even want to compare the two. Chain of Command and Dux Britanniarum both come from the same branch of the lardy tree, and they're about as similar as infamy, and ducks are. So totally different.
So that's a very comprehensive question there, Adrian. Hope that helped.
No, it was a comprehensive answer. The question was succinct.
Sorry, that's right. It's a comprehensive answer.
Yeah.
Oh well, there we go.
It was a long answer.
It was a very long answer. But there's another excellent starter question here. We've got Paul Edwards in Staffordshire.
The pink tickler.
The
Pink tickler himself.
Here he is, the pink tinkler.
The rinky pink tinkler.
And it's as plain as your nose.
Well, we are being slightly flippant with good friend Paul. However, his question is certainly not of the humorous variety, and it's a really good question.
Let's have another one. Let's have another one then. We don't want to see this question. do we?
No, we're going to have to start with something. We had a couple of good questions to start with. So this one is...
Ask Nick, because my brain's switched off.
So, Paul Edwards, hashtag Sidney. Do historical rules writers have a duty of respect to those who died in the wars which we recreate? Fun at the expense of realism? Does dispensing with realism improve accessibility, which in turn might lead to education? So, since Richard took the first one, Nick, we're going to have to go to you for the second.
Lovely tower question. Which part of the question would you like me to answer first?
Yeah, that's about 17 questions in there, aren't there?
Paul got his questions.
Do we owe respect to those who went before? Is kind of the thrust of it, isn't it?
Well, put it like this: we're going to a Commonwealth War grave on Sunday, just south of Antwerp, to pay our respects to those very people. Sorry, Nick, I know it's your question.
No, that's okay. That's all right. You just talk all over me, mate.
I will
fine. Well, we are going on Sunday to a Commonwealth War grave. Anyway, yes, of course we do. So let me talk about if the Lord spares us. If the Lord spares us is a rule set for the First World War that only exists as a testament to those who served in that campaign during the First World War. It's actually if you open the front of If the Lord Spares Us, you will see in there an inscription that is to the memory of Lance Sergeant Albert Edward Skinner, who was killed in the hills near Beersheba in 1917. And in fact, it was through researching his war that led me into realising actually this is a really interesting campaign to understand. And I think through wargaming, not just with that particular case but in other cases and for other wars, researching into the way that the campaigns developed and the way that battles were fought is a wonderful way of actually trying to connect to that lost generation and understand a little bit of some of the horrors that they went through, and in fact appreciate the efforts that were made by them all the more for having done so. So absolutely, war gamers, games designers do, I think, feel that very closely, and I think we do it in all of our rules, don't we, really? I think we have fun because it is a fun activity, but we try to base our games in historical plausibility and reverence, I think. And we don't, although we do have a laugh when we play, we do very much appreciate that we are playing a game, and we are very lucky that we're able to play that game because of the sacrifices of those who went before.
And do you get to the point sometimes when designing rules that you try and add in human elements, or you're trying to make the game, perhaps the war game, into more of a game? Do you ever feel that you lose connection to some extent with some of those principles, or at that point do you just stop and limit to the extent that you're trying to create a game? I mean, What a Tanker is a different wargaming experience than Chain of Command or Troops, Weapons and Tactics, one of the older rules that we've done in the past. I mean, to what extent do you feel that there's a tension there between respect and creating a game which is fun?
It is a good question. So you look at What a Tanker, which is a fairly entry-level game, and I was really thrilled to see, actually only yesterday on Facebook, that there's a chap who's been playing What a Tanker with very young children at school. It's even a simplified version of What a Tanker, if that's even possible, and getting them to play that as an entry level, but also to help them understand a little bit about the history and be aware of some of these things. I think that kind of comes down to how you choose to play the game as well. I mean, we can provide the rule sets and people can play them whichever way they choose. What a Tanker simplistic though it may be, you can play it with a historical angle that actually can make you recognise even more so how difficult it must have been to do some of this stuff for real.
One colonel of in a British half colonel in a British Army regiment was posted somewhere that he uses it as a training game for his tank commanders.
Really?
Yeah. I wouldn't make it up, mate.
No. Well, good for him. But I'm slightly concerned that NATO's plans might revolve around how many twos they roll.
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, in my own experience, I remember when we were playing a lot of Through the Mud and the Blood, and it's a great set of war games rules, but I think it's impossible to play a game about some conflicts, First World War in particular perhaps, without really thinking about what you're trying to recreate. So I remember we had a game which related to the use of gas, and a sort of, not really in any way an expert about the First World War, but I remember before the game I read quite a bit about the use of poison gas, and there's a very famous book by a guy called Fuchs called Just Gas, and he was one of the guys in charge of the gas section, or the gas the side of the Allied war effort, or the British war effort. And actually only through the event of wargaming did I actually come into contact with thinking about that and reading about some of the accounts and some of the after effects. And it's inextricably linked, creating, I think, a good wargaming and understanding what's actually happening to the individuals who are caught up in the conflict. And I think when you do create elements in the game which are more fun, like chance card events, and things which perhaps make the game flow and soften some of the simulation aspects, you don't necessarily need to lose that respect. And there's ways in which we did that with Through the Mud and the Blood, in accentuating the role of the big men. So we personalised those more and gave the experience of playing with those big men, those leader figures. We gave them more characteristics which were relevant as regards those individuals who were present in the conflict.
Well, I would say that every one of our games is an attempt to put you in the hot seat as the gamer, to put you inside the head of the guy who's on the spot, whether it be fighting Napoleonic French skirmishers, or advancing Wehrmacht, or whatever.
Flying a Spitfire in the Battle of Britain.
Absolutely. We've always tried to take the human element of all of our games, and have that decision-making element, which is, if you're the guy on the spot, what do you do now? And I can only speak for myself, but I know that when I play these games, I get a moment normally in every game where I say, "Oh my God, what must this have been like?" What must this have been like to be the last section holding a hedgerow, or to be told you've got to get up and cross that bit of open ground under fire? That's got to be a horrendous experience, and I'm so grateful not to have to make those decisions for real. So I think the game allows us an insight into that, and I'd like to think that we tackle it respectfully, but accepting that, it's a hobby and we like to have fun as well.
I'd echo all of that. I think, we've talked about it before. We name our leaders because we want people to develop a relationship with them and actually care about whether they live or die. What was the other bit of the question about entry level something or other?
We also had Paul asking, does dispensing with realism improve accessibility? Which in turn might lead to education.
Does giving somebody McDonald's for their lunch every day turn them into somebody who's interested in haute cuisine? I would suggest not really. It depends to what extent we're talking about removing. What was the phrase you used?
Dispensing realism, improving accessibility.
Yeah, no, I don't see dispensing realism as improving accessibility. What I see dispensing realism does is to dispense with realism. Improving accessibility is about designing games that have mechanisms which people can enjoy and play, even if they're entry-level games. And Water Tanker is a great example of that with what Nick created there. It's a game that is simple to play, but it is not simplistic. Dispensing with reality just creates a nonsense experience, and I don't think giving somebody a nonsense experience encourages them to stay with the hobby. So somebody coming into the hobby playing a game which is a shoddy interpretation of history might well think, oh, I'll pick up a book on that and read about that, and then when they pick up a book they go, well, that game was nonsense then. And that won't encourage them. What you've got to try and do is give them a game that is accessible through the mechanisms that are in there, but not dispense with reality. It's not a binary thing. What do I want, fun or history? The two things go together hand in hand. I've said it a million times, and I'm always happy to say it one more time.
Well, I think that's probably said that loud and clear, so good question, Paul. Thank you very much for that. However...
Ask Paul what he's printing out in Marital Aid Pink this week.
So that's that hashtag Ask Paul for that one. But however, Andy at Friends of General Haig asks another question, and that is, in the USA and the UK, are we potentially missing out if our choice of wargaming periods is biased by what is available to read in the English language? If so, then what can we do about it? Now, Richard, you're a man who speaks many languages.
Normally gibberish and rubbish. But
That's a great question from Andy.
yeah.
But I know you read a little French and a little German, and I know you're a man who's very much into research and just reading generally. I mean, you're a great reader, as we all are, I think. Yeah. What do you would? And you're also a great researcher. So what would you?
My phone fire up his arse. Oh, Richard, you're such a great reader.
We'll get to the insults later.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't think I need the microphone held that close, if I'm honest, Sid. I think my voice tends to carry as it is. You should probably put the microphone in the car behind us and still get reasonable sound quality from me. What was your question? Oh,
I'm trying to remember what the question was now.
I do. I remember it. Right.
Research in English language.
The answer is yes. You learn another language, being flippant. But yes, obviously we do restrict ourselves, and also we restrict our understanding of things that we think that we've got great knowledge of. So if we only read about Market Garden, for example, which is something that obviously Nick and I have been reading about a lot, if we only read about that from an Anglo-centric point of view, or from a US point of view, or from a German point of view, we don't understand the other 2 points of views. So
only 2?
Well, yeah, okay, and the Dutch point of view, and so on and so
forth. But hang on, wait, just there a minute. Yeah. Are you reading that in Dutch?
Well, I've just taken the wrong sodding turning, thanks to you. Right, great. Right,
well, that's interesting. The sat nav has become a sea of turnings.
It really has, hasn't it? Well, I can read a bit of Dutch, but it's not. I mean, like all these languages, Dutch and French and German, I can read an article in them. I can't read a book in it. It's
I think
heavy.
There are some really good little sources you can pick up, though. You don't have to be. Yeah. You don't have to be able to speak, Dutch to read a map in Dutch. Right? You have to be able to look at a map and read.
You just have to talk like that.
As long as you can understand klomp and de koop, you're
klomp
okay.
But
so for instance, a good example of this is when we came back from I think the journey that you sent us on, Sid, when we went to Best. Do you remember at
Hull? Wherever it was.
No, when we stopped at the ferry terminal, whatever it was, on the way back in W.H. Smith's, there was a magazine in there, and it was a magazine about D-Day, and it was completely in French, written by the French for French audience. But you bought a copy, and I bought a copy, on the basis that it contained some really lovely maps and images, and also I think Richard is the same. I have a good enough understanding of French that you can read the articles and understand what they're talking about. And I think we're restricted by the language we can speak. That's isn't everyone. But I think through reading around the topic as much as you can and trying to find good quality sources, then you can get an insight into the other view, the view through the other side of the lens.
You can, but I mean there are situations when we simply literally don't have access to stuff we're interested in. Now, for example, I'm talking to Benito in Spain about the Roman fight against the Celto-Iberians in northern Spain, and there's just hardly anything on it in English, and Benito tells me there's hardly anything on it in Spanish either. But and then again, we look at our colonial history, and we can read about the Zulu Wars and the Maori Wars, New Zealand Wars, call it whatever you want. But the thing we don't know about is the French, assaulting Tonkin and the French colonial wars, because they're just not on our radar often. Yeah. And it's not that we can't read French, it's the fact that we just don't know about them because we weren't taught about them at school.
That's a good response to Andy's question.
Well, what do you think?
I think that the further back in history you go, the more that you've got to rely on that tactical snippeting of trying to find out answers in the most unexpected of places. Yeah. So I think my answer is broken down into two parts. First of all, you've got to examine all the sources you can find in the languages you can read. And I think once you've exhausted all the English sources, then you can make a start on sources in languages you can't read. And there's two ways of doing that. So first of all, you can actually read that yourself. And speaking and translating are two different things. You can translate an article in French in a way that you might not feel confident speaking French or German or Spanish. The second way is actually, there's all got friends who are native speakers in different languages. Like my sister, is pretty bilingual. She's lived in France since 1990, and we've gone through quite a bit of stuff talking about some of the French sources for periods I'm interested in.
That must fill her with joy.
Well, she's very interested. My sister's very interested in history. We're going to move on from my sister very quickly, though. However,
now I've got to make Richard. You know these road signs that we keep going past, right? They've got red circles, and inside the red circle is a number.
Oh yeah.
That's supposed to be the speed limit. It's not the number of G that you should pull as you come out the other side of the sign.
I thought it was merely a suggestion.
Okay, Sidney, I think
we've used that question. Let's move on to two very good questions. I think, first of all, Agent Pumpkin, again in Staffordshire, asks, real ale or cooking lager?
Oh, well, there's no competition. Cooking lager all the way. Real ale is not actually beer. And I've had a pub, and I can reveal for the first time that I was obliged to sign an official secrets form to not reveal that real ale is actually swamp water cut in with 50% horse's wee. But I'm prepared to breach that official secrets act to inform you of that now, whereas cooking lager is made clinically and carefully in a test tube in Northampton. Now, what more do you want?
I think that, let me put another side to that. I think it depends on your reasons for having a drink. If you intend to have 10 pints, then cooking lager is the way to go.
Absolutely.
But if you're in a pub on a Sunday afternoon and you just want a couple of beers,
Why would you just want a couple of beers? What sort of person wants
set you off on a nice late afternoon snooze, then actually a couple of pints of decent real ale
rubbish
can really hit the spot for
Have
that.
10 pints, you'll snooze even better, mate.
I'm a real ale man, I've got to say.
I think because it's pretentious.
No, it's not pretentious.
Of course it's pretentious.
No,
Can you taste the extra citra hops in this one?
I think
it's lovely.
The toys are going out of the pram because you don't like the answer, Richard.
I think this is going to sound rich coming from us, and thinking about the names that we give our products. But some of the names that people who produce these craft beers give to their products
I think they're
are
good.
Truly absurd.
That's the only good thing about them.
And you know what? There probably is one called Infamy, and if there is, we'd love to receive a crate. Thank you very much.
I wouldn't. I've
10 free beers. There we go.
10 free beers.
So that's a great question. So the next one, moving on from there, Gareth Beamish in Pembrokeshire. What are your top 3 Wargamers legends that you would wish could be chucked in the bin?
Legends and myths of wargaming. I'll have to let me think about this for a minute.
This is the stuff that you should have done yesterday, thinking about it. Richard, we're going to gloss over Nick's inability to come up with his legends.
I remember reading that in my Twitter feed, thinking that's
Richard.
There is some obvious ones, but I won't talk about an obvious one. I'll talk about a very, very specific one. Was that when researching the Spanish Civil War some years ago, it was believed and repeated in 100 war games magazines and publications that a Moorish battalion was made up of 2 companies only. We're talking about the Moors who served with Franco's forces. And I read this in so many places, I thought, must be true. But with further research, I discovered it's complete and utter rubbish. And there's no reason why it wouldn't be complete and utter rubbish. Why would a Moorish battalion be structured in a completely and utterly unique manner? What I then discovered, after a very large amount of research, trying to go back to the original source of this two-company structure, was that it had been quoted in a War Games article in about 1975, and everybody, because we had no internet back in those days, everybody who was researching it after that had tremendously restricted and limited sources to base their findings on, and so this fact got repeated time and time again. And that, for me, made me realise that you can't look at secondary sources and accept them as telling you the truth, even if a dozen secondary sources are telling you that. You need to go back and research that back to find a primary source that tells you the truth. So that, for me, was the genesis of discovery about Wargamers legends. Nicholas, you're wringing your hands in
I've got two.
grief.
So I've had to think now.
I'm almost making up
two
three
myths.
now.
Two myths or legends.
Yeah.
So, myth number one, that you will recognise this, Richard.
Yeah.
Good troops will always beat bad troops.
Yeah.
Now, that was something that was drilled into me by somebody that we gamed with many years ago.
Yeah.
And I think some people do hold that as a truth, that good troops will always beat bad troops. Well, we know that for a fact that isn't true. So that's one myth.
That's a really good point. I'd like to pick up on that in a minute. You carry on and remind me to come back to it, or I'll forget it.
Okay, the second one is Napoleonic naval games are boring, which is also a myth, and I think something we've disproved through Kiss Me Hardy. That's my two so far. I'm thinking on the third.
Okay,
That's two. Well, while you're doing that,
I've got a second one.
oh, there we go.
Waffen SS troops are elite.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
Big myth. No, they're not. They're completely mixed bag.
Yeah.
And in most situations, they actually lack the discipline that good troops have. They talk about discipline in Nazi Germany and all that. What they're really talking about is brutality. So you daren't challenge the system. When they're talking about individual discipline within units, it is so often missing, which is why so often you see SS units committing atrocities that regular army formations would not commit. I'm not suggesting that regular army formations of any army don't ever commit atrocities, but it tends to be a breakdown of discipline that allows things like that to happen. So that's a big one there. The thing I was going to pick up on actually was really interesting, was that John Savage from Harrogate, who's helping do the very, very early play tests of Infamy, posted a report on, I don't know where it was, I think it was Facebook, and somebody picked up on the fact, they said, how on earth is it that barbarians can beat Roman legionaries? Well, that's really, that in essence, is that we're schooled throughout our wargaming to believe that certain things, that good troops always beat bad troops thing. And the interesting thing about Infamy is that yes, the Roman legionaries do have an advantage of their drill and their training, but they can't always use that drill and training to maximum advantage. And if the barbarians can catch them in the wrong tactical shape, then the barbarians can win. So we can't always make that assumption. Barbarians cannot beat Roman legionaries on equal terms. But I felt that was a really good point you made there, Nicholas, because we always are told, or we always have in our subconscious, that message that, well, how did they do that? Because they're really good troops, and they're not. But, of course, we have the vagaries of the dice in war games, which means that even if I'm tactically marvellous, if I roll totally brilliantly, Nick can still win, and vice versa. And of course it has to be that way, because otherwise it wouldn't be a game, would it? It would be a tedious simulation where the better troops always won. So, yeah, good points. Nick, you got any more?
I think there's the obvious one, of course, is you can't have history and fun. And that's the big one, and that is a myth. You can have history and you can have fun, and as you said, it's not linear, it's not binary.
No.
You can have both.
Well, I think I've got a couple as well. I'd say. I mean,
are the only ones interested, Sid? I think we've covered it perfectly well. You go for it, mate.
You can't wear red trousers and blue shirts, is that?
Well, that would be a fashion faux pas, so you definitely wouldn't want to do that.
No.
But I think that it's all about, those people say, well, it's all about what your troops are armed with. And I think back to sort of WRG Ancients and WRG Renaissance, when it was all about how much armour you were carrying, or whether you had your Imperial Roman legionaries had pilum and darts, and short swords, and it's not really about what you're armed with. It's about your approach to warfare as a unit, your discipline, your cohesion.
Yes, exactly.
And also, I have to say, if you're the Huns and you're appearing with like 400,000 troops, you're going to really cause a huge amount of difficulty for the later Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It's the same with the Ottomans in the late 15th and 16th century.
Yeah.
If you're turning up with almost 1 million men under arms, you are going to really struggle as a European kingdom against them, as Hungary in the 1520s found out. So it isn't really about what troops are armed with. It's about an approach to warfare and a context of the war which is being fought at that time. So that's one. And I think another one, sort of right on wargaming, sometimes you say, well, bridges are really difficult in wargaming because they choke points. But I like bridges in wargaming. I think this comes from one of the aspects on the WSS podcast, which I really enjoyed the other week. I think bridges really enhance the war game. They always create tactical problems and difficulties. They're not a choke point, they're really an opportunity for a game designer. So those would be two Raw Gamers legends I'd check in the bin.
And bridges are always at the heart of any battle. My kids hate it when we go on holiday, because one of the first things my daughter says to me is, how many bridges is Dad going to be photographing when we drive to this place and that place? Because actually that's, a lot of these actions happen around bridges.
Well, you look at
it's the way that wars develop and campaigns unfold.
You look at the pint-sized campaign, the generic 1940 pint-sized campaign, many rivers to cross. The reason for that campaign and the why it can be applied to so many situations is because the rivers and the bridges, of course, are key. Absolutely key. So yeah, it's unavoidable, isn't it?
So there we go.
Can I last one in there? There is a myth, I think, that war games are played by fat, bald white men. And I think that actually is a myth as well.
I'm not bald.
No, that's right. If you look round shows, the shows, there's actually a real diverse selection of people that are interested in the hobby, and we should open our eyes to that a bit more.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and I think that's an age thing as well. I mean, that's probably the hobby is greying, but I do see.
No, it's not.
And I disagree with that. I disagree strongly with that. I disagree strongly that the hobby's not diverse. It is diverse, and it is increasingly more diverse. And I think you can see the hobby changing in the same way as role playing's really changed.
Yeah.
When we used to start with Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s, it was kind of a nerdy thing to do, and now it's hugely acceptable for people of all genders, all preferences, all diversity. And I really don't agree that the hobby's greying. I think there's people approach it at different stages of intensity at different times in their life, but I do feel that the hobby is really thriving as regards younger entrants into the hobby. And Richard, I know that's something you're interested in as well.
Yeah, I feel very strongly on that. I mean, one of the things I'm really proud about is the fact that we have a really good female following, and that when you go on Twitter, the Yahoo group, any of the forums, you'll find them on there making their contribution, and people are not commenting on what their gender is, and that's the most important thing. I'm not a rabid feminist or anyist, but what I am is somebody who believes in equality. I don't judge people based on what their gender or what their colour is. As long as they're sharing my hobby with me, then we've got something in common that links us together. And I think that's particularly important at this point in time, where in this country we're going through a general election campaign, and politics can be incredibly divisive, and you can lose friends over that. And I think when people are coming up on my Twitter feed telling me what their political opinion is, I'm starting to think, let's drop all this and let's focus on the things, not the things that divide us, but the things that bind us together, and that is our hobby and shared interest and love of gaming and wargaming. So
there we go. We filled that rubbish bin, I think, comprehensively. Good question, Gareth. Thank you very much. Another question here from Steve Bond in the Welsh Valleys.
No, Mr. Bond.
So-
I expect you to die.
Does he expect you to die? Yes.
So I'm not going to try and read this in a Scottish accent because
Welsh.
Steve is, of course, Welsh. However, Steve asks, you said that Dungeons and Dragons was a game that you played in the past.
Yeah.
So first question, Steve sneaked in 3 here.
Oh, right.
Did you play any other role-playing games, guys? What aspects, number 2, what aspects of role-playing games do you think have influenced your rule sets? And number 3, are there aspects you'd still be interested in using that you've not yet found a fit for? So,
I like the one where I dress up as a naughty nurse.
I like role-play games.
No.
don't think they're the ones Steve's asking about.
I've never played Dungeons and
Have you never
Dragons.
played
I don't
Dungeons?
You've never been to the village of
I
Humber?
may have
I
played
can't
it
believe this.
once at the club in about 1985
Yeah.
for one evening, sitting around a white table, thinking, "What the f*** is going on here?"
missed
So
out, mate.
I've never
You've missed
I've
out.
never really played D&D. But however,
Some people don't have the mental capacity to really enjoy that type of game.
to jump to the end of that a little part, the dungeon, these games where the sort of like the dungeon unfolds before you, where you put like you go from one cave to the next and you put a new piece of terrain down. That's really interesting, and I really want to play Where Eagles Dare. Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood going round the Schloss Adler in like a dungeon trawl kind of
Where did they get that name
Dungeons
from?
and Dragons with guys dressed as evil Nazis. That sounds a bit of fun. I could do that.
It must have taken the script writers forever to come up with the name Schloss Adler. Phew.
Yeah, I'm open. I am open to role-play games for sure. And the Discord game that we played most recently, the one set with the irregular horse in Lardia and the Partisans, that was really an online role-play from what I can make out of it. That seemed to be unfold in that fashion.
I feel that having played a bit of Dungeons and Dragons, I got to the point where I thought, why do you need rules for this? And why do you need this setting? You can actually do this in any setting you like, and you don't need rules. You just blag it. You make it up as you go. You sketch out the ideas, obviously, but what happens, how the non-player characters react, really has to be based on how people are reacting with them, how people are projecting themselves out, and then the non-player character reacts to that. And I think that role-playing is something we do in almost subconsciously in all of our games, because we're trying to create that decision-making process. So we're trying to get people to play the role of the platoon commander or force commander. And as part and parcel of that is encouraging them to take on aspects of the decisions that are made, but also aspects of the personality. So I think, having dabbled with a bit of role-playing, I think we try and introduce elements of that into our games. I think there is a time and a place for different aspects of that, and playing the Kriegspiel that we did online was absolutely perfect for creating those characters or even caricatures in some cases, and developing those ideas by allowing the game to meander in its own direction. And that's something you can't necessarily do in a tabletop game. Equally, we talked about civilians, didn't we, in one of the recent podcasts? The civilians in that game were completely and absolutely pertinent. Civilians in the game of Chain of Command are more problematic. I'm not saying you can never have them.
I think every Kriegspiel is a role-play game.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's what I always take away from Kriegspiel. I mean, it's essentially you're playing a role. You're not necessarily in a situation that you're looking at the rules in microscopic detail.
Well, you shouldn't be looking at the rules at all, should you? Even as an umpire, really, you should. Any rules that you have when you're generating one of those Kriegspiel games should be, roll the range of potential outcomes is, this is the worst, this is the best. The worst being 1, the best being 6. Now roll the dice and you probably get a result either at the end of the spectrum or somewhere in the middle, and then you base your decision on what that outcome is on the specific circumstances. You can't anticipate every situation, so really, why try and anticipate any situation? Why not just accept the fact you're rolling it up? Paddy Griffiths was the one who introduced us to that technique, wasn't he, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he said there's no other rules are necessary if you're intelligent enough to bullshit your way through the story.
So thanks very much, Steve. That's a great question. And we've got another good one from Carl Lothian in North Shields. And Carl asks, having listened to various interviews about infamy, do you think a similar campaign system to Dawns and Departures would be a good fit for your new set of rules?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, there's a campaign system built in there. One of the reasons for the rules being called infamy is that to win the campaign, you need to get a triumph, or whatever the barbarian equivalent is. To lose the campaign, if you become infamous and are assassinated, and at that point you've lost the campaign. So it's very much in there. What are you doing? You've got some kind of high-powered flashlight, Sidney. I'm sitting here and Sidney's flashing in the back of the car. So there is a campaign system in there which allows you to work through that, and the way that will work quite simply is you don't need a map, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So you roll the dice to generate what the next campaign game is. Each of the tables can be generated randomly, and then you see what the outcome of that is, and that potentially sees you go up the career wall or down it. But of course, very keen to get some really nice looking maps and allow people to fight their own campaign on the frontier. And I see that as being a case of, the more successful you are, the more settlers you're going to have coming to farm the area. The less successful you are, the more you're going to see yourself falling into abject poverty and gaining a terrible reputation and even infamy in Rome and being stabbed in the back.
So all life there, and that sounds all very good. So thanks very much for that, Carl.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly on, we've got another Ancients question from Pete Palmer in New South Wales, who says,
G'day!
What recommended fiction in the same type as Sharp would be good for infamy, other than Rosemary Sutcliffe's Eagle of the Ninth, which is a given?
It is a given. Well, you've got the Simon Scarrow, Macro and Cato books, which are a absolute parallel with the Sharp books. They're your classic military action type story books. Great series, about 20 books in the series, and he's still producing them. Really like that. Harry Sidebottom's books on Rome are absolutely fantastic, and for me, a bit more historically granular and less Action Jackson, which the Simon Scarrow books are. There are loads of books out there. There's a whole series of books on following Spartacus, the names of which have escaped me, but I've been listening to them because one of the things we want to cover in Infamy is the option of doing some servile wars. So the Romans are going to be fighting armies of slaves and gladiators, which I think is really quite a funky option.
Very good. Nick, did you have anything on that? Are you into that sort of type of fiction?
Anything by Frankie Howard is always good.
We were expecting an answer like that.
Harry Sidebottom books are, I think,
first class.
the only ones that I'm really aware of.
Nice chap as well. He gave me a big extended reading list of academic stuff when I started researching Infamy, and I'm very grateful to him for that.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to move on from books to shelves, because Jay in the Netherlands asks, what shelves do you have on Lard Island? Do you tend to go for the cheapo ones of flat pack variety, or are yours crafted in English oak?
Well, funnily enough, J, you say?
J from the Netherlands.
Does that stand for anything, or is it just the letter J?
It's just the letter J.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it could stand for many things. It might be Jan or Jan. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Other names beginning with J.
Other names. Well, in Lard Island, we've actually, in both the Lard Island Games area and in the library, we've got Billy bookcases from IKEA. which are flat pack variety, and I've had some of those since I was a teenager, and they... Am I turning off here? Yep. And they nearly missed the Channel Tunnel, and they have done sterling service, so I cannot recommend them highly enough. And no, we don't get things handcrafted, because we publish war games rules for a living, not multi-millionaire helicopter pilots.
At Chez Moi, you have I have solid oak bookcases.
Oh, do you?
And I have steel racking bookcases. One type of which is in the house, and the other type of which is in the garage.
Wow.
You can draw your own conclusions which way round.
Which?
Perfect variety there. So we'll move on to the next question. David Hunter in Shropshire, and this is probably going to be a question on infamy again.
Not another one on infamy.
Yeah, well, there were lots of
They all got it infamy.
If you had to assign characters from Simon Scarrow's Roman novels to the podcast team, who would best fit who?
Oh, interesting one. Let's think. Well, Macro and Cato, I guess, are going to be the two characters, and of course there's three of ours. Well, Optio Cato came from a humble background, self-made man by his own efforts, thinks himself a bit of an intellectual, takes papyrus scrolls with him to read. Okay, well, that could be somebody. Centurion Macro, earthy sort, nothing he likes more than a fight and a drink, never happier than when hanging round a boozer, straight talking, doesn't suffer fools gladly, says what he likes and likes what he thinks. Well, I don't know who that would be. Well, of course, there's other characters. Narcissus, the Emperor's man, Narcissus, hugely fat, corpulent, a man you couldn't trust an inch. Actually, I'd say none of those characters are anything like any of us, actually.
It doesn't sound at all familiar.
No, it doesn't sound familiar at all. I don't think we're like anybody in those characters. I think we're characters in our own rights. So, yeah, that's an interesting question. But no, I don't think we resemble any of those people.
It's a wonderful question. Wonderful question, thank you, David. And we're on next with Axis and Aliens from Connecticut. And they said, they asked Sidney, can you put the Oddcast on iTunes? That's a very good question.
It is. No, I keep trying and iTunes keep rejecting it. Mike Hobbs commented the other day about the humorous nature of some of the remarks that I put on, and they still don't load it up. However, we are on Podbean. So that may be Podbean. It's an app. You can get it for your iPhones. And here we are. Bring up my Podbean, and I've got my podcasts on there, including TooFatLardies. So you can get the Oddcast on Podbean.
So well done. So that's the first question. But there was a supplementary question from Axis and Allies.
Right.
And that was they really enjoyed playing Water Tanker. That's Fall In a couple of weeks ago. Any chance of creating a Cold War variant?
Yes.
It's perfectly reasonable.
Joe Legan,
I think it's already exists, doesn't it?
My friend Joe Legan has done. Joe Legan has done a version, which he's very keen to make available on War Games Vault, I believe, as a charity raising thing.
Well, we love charity.
We love charity,
But
yeah, why not? Go for it.
Yeah.
I see. Actually, just so I see that young Johan.
Yeah,
he's done, of course, the
Mex
version for Mex, which is really quite popular as well.
Fantastic.
And that could be Tex-Mex for our friends in Texas.
Well, that'll be absolute. We can play that at the Dallas-Fort Worth Nard Day. We'll come on to that in a bit. But final question, Axis and Aliens, very quickly, gentlemen. What's your favourite breakfast meat?
Bacon.
Really, I don't think there is any other breakfast meat.
What about you, Sid? What do you meat do you like to have?
I'm not a great fan of meat at breakfast, but it probably would be bacon.
I do like a continental breakfast. I do like a bit of salami.
I go for
cheese.
No, not so mad on cheese. I will have cheese, but as cheese is not a breakfast meat.
Salami and cheese.
Yeah,
It's really nice
yeah.
for breakfast.
Come on, Serrano.
Bacon, but it's got to be
Don't have anything.
really.
Yeah.
But bacon, it's got to be proper bacon. I'm sorry, but this question has come from the other side of the pond, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Their American bacon is not like English bacon.
No.
And there's
With
nothing
Serrano
quite
ham,
like
then.
a bit of Shropshire gammon.
Smoked or unsmoked?
Well, I'll go for either. I like smoked myself, but I can go for either.
I prefer unsmoked. Back or streaky?
Back.
Back, me. I'm a back man too.
Yeah. Are you a streaky man, Sid?
I'm not really a bacon fan, I must say. Not
What?
huge.
What kind of communist language is that?
Well,
The
moving
things
on
you
from
find
that,
out about people.
moving on from that question
Oh
to the next
my
one.
God, he
Wee
doesn't like
Derek.
bacon.
No, Wee Derek up at Musselburgh, just near Edinburgh, says,
He likes bacon.
where exactly is the pulse that Sidney has his finger on? And which pulse would he like it to be on? Well, with a question like that, who knows? What pulse have I got my finger on? Well,
Maybe yours, wee Derek. Maybe yours.
Maybe yours, Wee Derek, indeed. And whose would I like it to be on? Well, that's a leading question. isn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
One of the Bay City Rollers, maybe. Derek's a big fan of the Rollers.
Putting my finger on the pulse of the Bay City Rollers, there's no greater privilege for an Englishman, I think. So we'll probably leave it at that.
He's saying shang-a-lang as he took his pulse.
Jeff Bond in Caerphilly asks,
Is that near
where?
Caerphilly?
who or what rules writers today are you impressed with? And do you feel frustrated by the number of, let's say, average rule sets that are released by a few of the bigger companies on a regular basis?
Oh.
Thank you, Jeff.
Leading question.
there.
Jeff, leading question Bond.
So, Richard, let's start with you.
I have a real issue that I am so busy playing our games that I don't really get a chance to play anybody else's games. So as for rule designers, honestly, I'm not in a position to comment, and that's not me avoiding the question. It's me simply saying I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I mean,
Nick?
I'm a little bit in the same camp as Richard. I mean, what I would say is that I have actively been trying to play other games, but not necessarily with a kind of around a themed author approach. But these are around more board games and other style of games as well. So sometimes the creators of those actually, I don't know. I'm not aware of who the creators are. But I think there's a number of good writers in the hobby creating good rules. And lots of rule sets that get very credible and good write-ups. So I think the hobby is live with good thinking. I think that the guy behind To the Strongest, for instance, is really solid. Simon Miller. That's right. A really credible writer with good rule sets in his background. Look at Dave Brown as well, somebody else that we've worked with, who's got a good track record of creating good rule sets.
Yeah, I was thinking of Dave as being in the tent rather than outside the tent.
He's
but
not is he in your tent, is he?
Well, he's
Dave's,
it's a metaphor.
Dave's in everyone's tent.
That's right.
Well, I've got to say Sam Mustafa. I thought you were going to mention Sam Mustafa.
Yeah, I've not played
his game.
Rommel, so I
Lone
can't
Street
comment
is
on
a
that.
fantastic game. This is Maurice. Both of those are really, really good games by Sam Mustafa.
Well, we haven't played them
I'll
yet.
have to get those out. Okay, and
I
the next part of the question: who or what rules do you feel frustrated by the number of average rule sets? Leading question from Jeff. Have to take your first answer, gentlemen.
Well, it doesn't frustrate me.
No, it doesn't frustrate me either. It disappoints me as a wargamer to see rule sets being produced with an incredible amount of hype, saying, this is fabulous, come and buy this, have an advanced order and buy this, when it's clearly under play tested, underdeveloped, and is simply being used as a vehicle to ship a load of figures out. And that disappoints me as a wargamer, because I'm thinking, God almighty, if I bought that and then got a game out, which when you discover what it actually is like, you think, no, that really cannot be a product of somebody's inspiration to have produced that game, and also it clearly cannot have been developed properly. I think that's bad for the hobby, because people coming into the hobby might come along and play a game that is just so bland and uninteresting, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that they're going to go, well, there ain't nothing in that for me. When in fact there's a lot in the hobby that is really good, and again, I think that it's a bit like, it's a bit like buying things that have been created by somebody who's a craftsman and cares about what they're doing, and somebody who's mass producing. I think that's the disappointing thing as a hobby. It doesn't frustrate me. I mean, I certainly see it very positive that people are coming into the hobby and thinking, well, actually, maybe I want to start looking at these Lardy rule sets, because I've heard that they are properly developed and are properly play tested. So from my point of view, that's positive. But for the hobby, it's not good to have people churning out rule sets that are mediocre, if not to say shoddy. And the sad thing is, it's happens so rarely. But what's kind of vaguely sad is that the people who go, I can't believe it, I bought this set of rules and I bought this all these figures to go with it, and it's a terrible game. But then the next hype comes along saying, buy this rule set, is the best thing, and all the figures to go with it, and then they still go ahead and do it, and are then surprised when what they're getting is once again mediocre, disappointing, and underdeveloped.
So there we go. More crafting, less mediocre. But on the creative energy front, Sean Randall in Kent asks, do you think that the creative energy that Infamy has received is because, Richard, it's the first new rule set or era you've done since Chain of Command?
No.
It's not the first new rule set we've done since Chain of Command either.
Well, I think he's suggesting me that I project manage this one. Obviously, What a Tanker was yours.
Yeah.
Sharp Practice 2 was obviously a second edition, but frankly, Sharp Practice 2 was so heavily different from Sharp Practice 1. It was effectively, a whole new project. It wasn't just a case of updating a few erratas and some changes. It was a different set of mechanisms. And obviously, we had Fighting Season in there, which I project managed, which didn't come to fruition. I don't think that the energy that has come about is because of any issue of it's been X number of years since I led the development of a rule set. It's inspiration is a bit like a very rubbish bus service. You never know when it's going to turn up, and when it does, you've got to get on the bus. And this bus pulled up unexpectedly, and then I found myself, really, really inspired by it and enjoying it. I've always been interested in history of Rome. I've always been interested in understanding how troops fought. So combining those two things, I'm really enjoying the research, loving the research.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, the next question is from Benito, our good friend Benito in Madrid, and that's what are your 3 key book recommendations ahead of Infamy?
Right, okay.
Just 3 only.
Yeah, I'm in a car on the Eurotunnel. I haven't got my books with me. I would say Adrian Goldsworthy's a classic book on, I can't remember what it's called, Fighting Tactics of the Roman Army or something like that. I would say definitely Tacitus, Agricola and Germania, which I count as one book because my copy is a double volume, which is a fabulous primer on ancient Rome's and barbarians. And then I'd say Caesar's Conquest of Gaul.
That's your answers, Benito. Over to Nick, I think, or both of you maybe. Maybe this is also a question from Benito. Is there any more or less firm timetable of publication for the Market Garden supplements? Maybe that's you, Nick.
Well, I don't know that we can give a date yet, and just to say that it's now in the stage of we're doing layout for maps, etc. So it's coming.
Yeah.
Very good.
Arnhem's coming home.
Arnhem's coming home. And the next question from Donald McIntyre.
Where's your trousers?
Asks, will the Arnhem campaigns include rules for gliders and paratroopers to update those in the 1940 campaign book?
Maybe.
That's your answer, Donald. Battlebrush Studios in Austria asks, What was the title of the book that Sidney suggested in one of the most recent Oddcasts again? Oh, okay. This one for me this time. The one about campaigning in the 30 Years' War. I never quite caught it. So I think that's the Memoirs of James II. I think we talked about that on one of the book recommendations, which is a great primer on small unit action skirmishing in the it's the Fronde, not the 30 Years' War, so a bit later than that, but only by a couple of years.
Oh, rush out and buy that.
Rush out and buy. Well, it's a great book. It's the one where James II spends about 4 or 5 pages talking about buying fodder for his horses, which is actually really interesting. But if you're into research, you're into research. Okay.
It's all fodder for thought.
All fodder for thought. Boom, boom. Jeremy from Bury, formerly of Port Elizabeth in South Africa, asks, has Sid packed his infamous red trousers, and will they be the same shade of red in a different country? I'm always after some trouser action with Sidney. Wow. Well, Jeremy, my good friend, thank you so much. No, I've not packed my so-called infamous red trousers.
You haven't packed them?
No.
Well,
I've
soiled them.
Go back and get them.
No, I've not packed
Well,
my
you can buy some.
oh.
To get you some.
No, you can't just go out and buy fine terracotta trousers like that. No, I've got different trousers. I've got cheap.
Coloured.
They are coloured, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow to see.
Oh, the big unveil.
the big unveil.
It's like when Boy George lets his outfits come out.
No radiators though. BBQ. BBQ
Get on with it.
BBQ Large Texas from Dallas asks, have you had real barbecue? How would you like to join us in Texas for a Lardy Games Day in 2020?
Is that how it's
It certainly is.
Where's
Certainly.
he from? The West Indies?
No, it's on West Texas.
West Texas.
West
right.
Texas. Is it easy being crushed by a large vehicle?
Yeah, it sounds like
Sounds
it.
like it might be. What was the question?
What was the question? In English?
With apologies for everyone in America, and particularly in the wonderful state of Texas. Have you had real barbecue, and would you like to join us in Texas for a Lardy Games Day in 2020?
Oh, what a great idea that would be. Where would you have it? South Fork Ranch, wouldn't
Yeah.
it? Superb. We could have Miss
Sue
Ellie.
Ellen, you're lush.
Yep, that would be fantastic.
What was Cliff Barnes' ranch called? There's a
Oh,
question.
no, you can't ask questions
Oh,
like that.
that's the question that all of us Dallas fans really want to know.
I always felt
What a
that Cliff Barnes was a bit of a failure.
Well, that's not the question.
Yeah,
The
well,
question is,
so
what
did
was
Cliff Barnes. That was the
Barnes's-
issue.
That was the
What
issue.
was Cliff
yeah.
Barnes' ranch called? Answer,
Shit fork.
hashtag answer Sidney on that one,
Norfolk,
gentlemen.
maybe.
No, not Norfolk. That'd be crap.
No, but so
That'd be
yeah,
worse than
absolutely
Schloss Adler.
I absolutely love the idea of going to Texas for a games day. The idea of it is fantastic. The practicalities of it might be a little bit more difficult, but what a great venue it would be to take some lard to the state of Texas.
So that's the end of the Ask Sidney mailbag. Hope you've enjoyed all the questions which we've been asked and also the answers. And what's now to follow is us actually going to the show, which I know we're all looking forward to, and we'll have a full report on the show and some interviews next time. So that's all from us here on the way to Antwerp. Gentlemen, anything further to say?
Just goodbye, Sidney. Just goodbye.
Okay, goodbye everyone.
Catch you on the other side.
In tonight's show, Sidney Randall was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark, with music by Roger Barraclough and his band.